Take away Zidane, and France should have collapsed. They didn't. Benzema was already there. Take away Benzema, same story. Mbappé was already scoring. For 20 years, France has been losing irreplaceable players, one after another, and every single time, the same uncomfortable question gets asked in federations across Europe. Why does losing a legend never actually hurt this team? The answer isn't luck. Luck runs out. This never has. Somewhere in the last 2 decades, France stopped hoping for one great generation and built something. International football was always quietly afraid of a system that replaces its own. Legends before the rest of the world even notices they're gone. This is the story of how that system got built and what it cost to build it. Here's the question nobody in football wants to answer directly. What happens when a country stops hoping for generational talent and starts manufacturing it? Most nations get lucky once a generation. Spain had their golden decade. Belgium had a golden generation that never finished the job. France doesn't get lucky. France gets resupplied. Wave after wave, position after position, like the pipeline was never designed to stop. And that raises the question every rival coach has asked in private. If this doesn't slow down, how does anyone actually beat them long term? Start with a name almost nobody outside France was talking about a couple of years ago. Désiré Doué. By 19, he'd already featured in a Champions League final, not as a mascot, as a difference maker. And he wasn't even guaranteed a World Cup starting spot because the queue behind Mbappé, Dembélé, Olise, and Barcola was that deep. Most countries build their entire attack around one Doué level talent. France has him coming off the bench. But here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. Being that good and still not guaranteed a shirt does something to a young player. It's not just opportunity, it's constant, quiet pressure. Every training session is an audition. Every mistake gets replaced by someone else's chance. And it's not only the attack. Look at midfield, look at defense, the same story repeats. When one player stumbles, there isn't a scramble to find a replacement. There's already a queue of players who've been waiting for exactly this opportunity, sharpened by years of almost getting the call. That's clue number 1. But depth alone doesn't explain fear. So what's actually different here? The second clue isn't about talent. It's about timing. By 18, a French prospect has often already played senior football under real pressure. Ligue 1, European nights, hostile away grounds years before players from other nations get that exposure. Mbappé made his professional debut at 16, was a World Cup starter at 19. By the time most attackers are still figuring out senior football, he'd already won it. That kind of acceleration isn't free. Behind every fast-track teenager is a version of them that had to grow up faster than they should have, carrying senior team expectations while other kids their age were still adjusting to first-team dressing rooms. Some don't survive it. The ones who do come out of it almost unshakable. That's not talent fighting its way through. That's a structure pushing it through on purpose and only keeping the ones strong enough to handle it. So here's the harder question. What happens when the structure doesn't just survive losing? Players that get stronger from it? This is where it gets uncomfortable for every other federation. 2018, France win the World Cup with Mbappé as a teenage breakout star. 2022, an aging squad, injuries, a goalkeeping controversy, and they still reach the final, only losing on penalties to Messi's Argentina. Every time the core ages out, the replacement doesn't need a rebuild. He needs a game or two to settle in. But it's worth remembering, not every story in this pipeline ends in glory. For every Mbappé who breaks through, there are dozens of academy graduates who never get the call, who spend years fighting for a place that never comes. The system's ruthlessness is exactly what makes the ones who survive it so dangerous. Think about what that actually means for a young player growing up in that environment. He isn't just training to be good. He's training to survive a selection process more brutal than most. senior professionals ever face, knowing that talent alone won't be enough, and that someone just as hungry is always one step behind him. That's the smaller mystery hiding inside the bigger one. Why does France's backup plan look almost as dangerous as its first choice XI? Hold that question, it's about to matter a lot. Here's the contradiction nobody prepared for. Football always assumed the biggest threat to fairness would be money, a handful of. Super clubs hoarding the best players until the sport stopped being competitive. Nobody planned for the threat to come from a country instead of a club. Not wealth buying success, infrastructure engineering it. The World Cup runs on the idea that any nation can catch fire for one summer, that talent is random enough to keep things unpredictable. Senegal shocked France in 2002. Iceland shocked everyone in 2016. That randomness was the whole appeal. France quietly broke that assumption. They didn't get one golden generation like Belgium. They got a golden pipeline, one that doesn't stop producing even when you take pieces out of it. So where does a pipeline like this actually come from? Not one decision. Decades of it. Clairefontaine's National Academy model, feeder pathways from Ligue 1 clubs, a scouting network that reaches into working class banlieues most. European federations don't bother scouting as early or as hard. This is where the real story gets uncomfortable. Many of France's biggest breakthroughs, Mbappé from Bondy, Pogba from Rossi and Brie, Conte from a housing estate in Paris, came from neighborhoods that French football itself often overlooked in every other context. The country's football pipeline succeeded precisely where its wider institutions failed. It went looking for talent in places nobody else was willing to look. That's not just a scouting decision. It's a debt the system built itself on talent that came from struggle, from proving people wrong, from players who had something to escape and something to prove. That hunger doesn't show up in an academy brochure, but it shows up on the pitch every single time. Other wealthy federations built academies too. Few of them were willing to scout that early, that deep, or that far outside the traditional pathways. That difference is where the real advantage lives, not in bigger budgets, but in a willingness to look where nobody else bothered. Here's the truth most breakdowns get wrong. It's not that France produces talent, it's that France's own players have to fight their way past each other before they ever fight anyone else. Doué isn't competing with an opposing winger for a spot. He's competing with Barcola, Olise, and Dembélé, three players good enough to start for almost any other nation on earth just to get on the pitch for France. That's the answer to the smaller mystery. The bench looks dangerous because it had to be. Dangerous just to survive selection. Internal competition that brutal doesn't happen by accident. It's the byproduct of producing too much talent for the positions available and of a country that scouted deeper, earlier, and more relentlessly than anyone else. In other words, the fear was never really about talent. It was about a country where mediocrity literally cannot survive long enough to reach a World Cup squad, built on the backs of players who had to fight for everything they got. That's the engine behind everything. So the central question finally gets its answer. What happens when a country stops hoping for generational talent and starts manufacturing it? You get a team that can lose Zidane and find Benzema, lose Benzema and find Mbappé, push Mbappé toward the twilight of his career and still have Dembélé, Olise, Barcola, and Doué lined up behind him. You get a nation that doesn't rebuild, it reloads. And that reload was never free. It was paid for in overlooked neighborhoods, in teenagers who grew up too fast, in academy prospects who never made it and never got the headlines, the invisible cost behind every seamless transition the world sees on the pitch. That's exactly the outcome. The World Cup's entire structure was built to prevent one country, too deep and too hungry to ever truly run out of answers. Go back to the beginning. Zidane gone, Benzema gone, Mbappe aging, and France still standing, still dangerous, still favorites. Now you know why. At this World Cup, France have won every group game, dismantled Sweden 3-0 in the last 32, and walk into their round of 1-6 match against Paraguay as reigning finalists with a squad so deep that world-class players are starting from the bench. This isn't a team chasing a golden moment. It's a team that already engineered past the need for one built not from luck, but from struggle, competition, and a refusal to ever stop looking. For the next name nobody else was watching yet. The World Cup was built on the idea that no nation should ever be unstoppable. France is proving match by match exactly why that fear existed in the first place.